Joining me now, Charles Wiley. Oh my God, we go back so long. It's hard. I don't even want to give his age because he's a little long in the tooth, as they say. But he's a 93-year-old. I just did, Charlie. A 93-year-old World War II veteran. He had a 13-year career as a Broadway child actor. He's been to 120 countries. He's covered a dozen wars. He was arrested 8 times by secret police of various countries. In order to get out of a Havana prison, with Castro in prison, he had to go on a hunger strike. He's spoken at more than 100 colleges in 20 countries on 6 continents, and he still at 93 gives 30 to 50 lectures a year to students. And I go back with him a long time, though. He doesn't want me to talk about when he ran for Congress, so I can't do that. But that's how I first met him back in 1976. And one time I sent him, he was in South America. I think he was in Honduras or El Salvador during when Reagan was. Yeah, and I sent him a personal letter. And he got it 8 months after I sent it, and it was opened by the Sandinista government. Oh man, so much history. Charlie, great to have you.
Well, it's always great to be on your show, and I'm so glad that you're out there telling the world about what's going on. That's a good thing.
Well, Charlie, the fake news is rampant. Here's where I really wanted to get you on today, other than to say hi, is you were saying in one of your lectures, you've been talking about the slanting of U.S. history in order to create a revolution, which is, if you follow how revolutions start, that's kind of what they do. Is this real? I mean, where are we going with this here in America?
We are, basically. I mean, no matter how you look at it, we are in the early stages of revolution. What you mentioned, I'm 93 years old, and I was a very precocious kid, and so I was very interested in politics from the time I was like 10 years old. I think I was keeping a scrapbook on the Italian invasion of Ethiopia, and I was watching the Spanish Civil War and things like that. I was not a normal type kid. But what it means is that I was watching from the time that the Nazis took over in Germany, and of course Stalin was the dictator in Russia, and we had Mao in China, and so on. And I've just watched them over the years, Castro, and I've studied revolutions and how they happen. Well, that's what we're in. When you have mobs on the street that have absolute total contempt for any of the security people for the nation. In other words, the police department, the parks department, police, the marshals, the border patrol, anybody that represents the government, to them is the enemy. And they're out there throwing Molotov cocktails. They're out there, at the very least, throwing rocks, and then it moves up to bricks and so on. Well, you're in a revolutionary situation. I organized, as you well know, some of the biggest things in American history, including the third longest parade in American history. And so I know a little bit about organizing and how to get people out on the street. But you know what? We had a parade, and then everybody went home. Or we had a rally, and everybody went home. In other words, you didn't come out day after day after day after day. You didn't come out and do your rally, and after an hour when normally the rally would be over, you didn't then march someplace else, and that you'd still be out there at midnight, and you were breaking into stores and smashing up businesses and burning cars and stoning cops and so on. So, the incredible thing is that this is now all accepted as normal. I have conversations with people that after I'm finished, I can't believe that they just said the things they did. So they say, well, the reason that the people got totally out of line and started trying to break up the federal courthouse is because there were people that were there from the state police. Or they brought in people. Well, wait a minute. I never knew that it was okay to have a riot because you didn't like the police. And we have now reached the point where people say that's okay. It's okay for virtually every player and coach and everybody else in the league, for baseball and basketball and coming up NFL, that the news is now if a single player in the entire league stands up for for our national anthem. I mean, if this is not a revolutionary situation, what is? And how did you get there? You got there basically because of the cultural wars. That for the 50 years that we've known each other, and even before, they have been absolutely educating American young people to dislike their country and to hate their country in many cases, and to feel totally guilty over every success we've had as a nation. In other words, what's happened is we've turned things completely around with the way we've taught history. And the biggest terrible thing that has happened is that we have convinced people somehow that it is all right to judge people and nations of the past by today's standards. Because if you do that, every person and every country in history virtually looks terrible, because the world has been terrible, and we played by terrible rules. That's the way the world worked. Now, if you judge somebody from 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, or 400 years, by today's standards, nobody looks good. No countries look good. Let's take religion. No religions look good. We have the most terrible thing that man ever devised was slavery. Horrible, wretched, miserable concept that you take away a person's total identity and ship him away from where he was born and lived to a new place where he will be enslaved. Nothing is worse than that. And yet, through thousands of years, we could go back about 10,000 years, and do you know that every single civilization had slavery? And not only that, but there was nobody really speaking out against it. Everyone accepted it, and that includes the religions. Go and look up Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Jewish, any of the various sundry Christian religions. You will not find a single major leader of a religion who ever said that slavery is a terrible thing and should be done away with. The best we can come up with in the Torah, the Jewish Torah, or the Bible, the best we can come up with is advice to slave owners to be nice to their slaves. There is not a single religious leader who ever said, slavery is horrible, we have to get rid of it. Not one. So if we're going to judge people of the past by today's standards, then Jesus Christ and all of the other great religious leaders all have a problem.
So we've got riots, we've got mobs, we've got protests that go in perpetuity. Last night in Portland, we saw the first time the burning of flags and Bibles in unison. So where does the left want to take this? Where does this end? I mean, is there an ending?
It just depends which part of the left you're talking about. If you're talking about the hard left, the end is that there is a major revolution and they take over the country. And we then have a communist dictatorship. If you look at Black Lives Matter, if you look at their original demands and where they wanted us to go, they're Marxist. I mean, they're openly Marxist. And so the people that are really in the early stages of this devised the whole thing. They're Marxist, and that's where they want to go. There are people along the line that want to go a lesser place. But basically, it is a total change. And what's incredible is when you talk to people that you think are perfectly sound and sensible, and you say, well, you know, how do you support this? Oh, well, they're really peaceful, and there's only some of them that start to throw Molotov cocktails and hate the police and openly hate the police, except that minority is a huge number of young people who have been brainwashed, and what is most incredible of all, have been self-brainwashed. The one thing that any communist or fascist dictatorship wants to do is to keep the young people from knowing the other side of any argument. And so they control everything that's written, everything that's broadcast, and they have a secret police to back it up. And if you want to read the ideas of somebody that disagrees with the government, you can be sent to a concentration camp. And yet we have young people here who they don't need a secret police to insist that they do it. They don't need the threat of a concentration camp or worse. They self-brainwash. They refuse to look at anything or listen to anybody that has a different point of view. It is the most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life. Young people brainwashing themselves. I mean, Stalin and Hitler, that crowd, they're spinning in their graves with jealousy. Can you imagine? I used to go behind the Iron Curtain and find young people who risked their lives to find out what the other guy had to say. And yet we've got these young people in America who self-brainwash. That is sick. That's about as sick as you can get. And what's also sick is that they've been taught to despise themselves. They look at their skin and they have self-hate. They've been taught to have self-hate. That is a sick concept. And yet that's what we have. And where does it end? God only knows, unless we get some real leadership that is going to start to talk sense and talks about what's happened in the colleges and the high schools and before that. And we almost have to redo the education of our young people so that they understand. You know, I hear endlessly about how the people that were over here who may or may not have had ancestors a couple hundred years ago that conceivably could have had anything to do with the South. At the same time that we're going down that road endlessly, nobody ever points out simple things, like that the leading families and the leading forces in many of the countries in Western Africa and down the coast, they made their fortunes, they became powerful, they became the people that run the countries and societies by slavery. They're the ones that enslaved their brothers. I never even hear anybody mention that's a major part. Nobody's asking them for any retribution. Nobody's even pointing the finger at the fact that there are people who can trace their ancestors back to the slavers and who have benefited 100% by it because they run the countries today. And yet you never hear a word about it. It is an all-out revolution against the people who were, in effect, the major people in the country. And you just take a look at all of our presidents and so on. And so we're now going to get even with them. And somehow, some guy whose great-grandfather came from Italy or Ireland or somewhere in Europe and came over here and worked his butt off to get where he is, somehow this guy is a bad guy now, and their children are taught to self-hate. It is a very sick society right now.
So let's go to education and stay on this for a minute. We're with Charlie Wiley, 93 years old, been around the world 5 times to Wednesday. I knew Charlie when he was behind the Iron Curtain. He was in Castro's jail. He had to get out by doing a hunger strike. He's talked to many KGB agents, Russian generals during the time of the Cold War where he was in the Soviet Union. He's been in China, so he knows all this stuff. But Charlie, when you look at the school system now in the United States, now we got teachers. I mean, I'm just befuddled by this. My own son's a teacher. We have teachers now that don't want to go back to work. So should we take this as an opportunity to maybe change our education system? But I mean, the fact that teachers don't want to get back to work, like what? I don't get this.
Well, and if you want to know what I did, I just sent some information. I went to a friend that was involved in homeschooling their children. And in view of the fact that we have no idea if the kids are going to get back to school, and if they are, when are they going to get back to school, and how is their education going to be handled, since that's the kind of thing we do, and since I've got a 10-year-old granddaughter, I just went to a friend that was in the homeschooling, got some information, and I just sent it to my son and former daughter-in-law and my other grandparents, and suggested to them that they set up a homeschooling for my granddaughter, because we got to wait for the school systems to decide what they're going to do, and God only knows what they're going to do. And I certainly know that they're teaching a lot of stuff that is terrible, and I don't want people teaching my granddaughter to have self-hate.
Well, you know, that's one of the things. I'm glad you did that, because one of the things that are starting to set up are these, I guess they call them homeschool pods, where one parent can't do it for their children, but they're getting together in groups of 5 or 6 where they share the responsibility.
Right.
And I think that might be the wave of the future, because, I mean, to have kids out of school, I'm just beside myself over it. And the answer I get from teachers is like, it's bizarre. It's like, well, I don't want to risk my life in order to go to work. Well, then why do you go to Walmart? I mean, why do you go to the grocery store? Why do you do anything? I mean, if you're at home in a hazmat suit, I get it. Other than that, you're still out and about. It just the whole thing is awful to me. Can Trump win, and how?
I think Trump can win. I think that right now it's an uphill struggle for a number of reasons, which we don't have time to go into. I think that he can turn it around. You could have so many things happen between now and the election that would turn it around, and I think that if he would stop sending tweets out and doing one thing after another that brings the wrath of God down on his head, I think that he could turn it around. I think that if he stayed on point, I think that certainly he can make a case that despite the fact that our economy is in tatters, it's in tatters because of what the Chinese launched on the world. And certainly we're in trouble. But, you know, the truth is that our economy is probably better off than anybody else's economy. So in a world in which everybody's economy is going down the tube, he's done a better job of setting us up to have a renewal. And that's the kind of thing that he's got to go out there and push. And he's got to get away from just shooting in every direction and changing the subject. He's got to get on point and make his strong points and get them across over and over. If they do that, I wish I was an advisor there, but when you're 93, nobody wants to listen to you anymore.
Well, we're out of time for this segment. Thanks for being with us today.